And I suspect, as an engineer, when you look at all of those pieces and parts that have to be in place, that's why you look at all of this and say it just could not have happened by random processes.
Part of my research is systems design. And I remember from my spacecraft engineering, a spacecraft is a very complex system with lots of different subsystems. It's impossible to just evolve that bottom up. It has to be designed top down. It would be ridiculous to start with a nut and a bolt and a washer and expect a complex system to evolve. But this Earth has a far more complex system than a spacecraft.
Well, Stuart, I remember when I was designing software that, just as you said, we didn't start with a line here or there. We started with that overall design. And I understand right now you're working on a very, very interesting project. You're working on something with Olympic biking, is that right?
That's right. My current project is designing the transmission for the British Olympic cycling team for World Championships and Olympics. What we've done is to redesign their chain and their sprockets, the whole transmission system, to get a very high efficiency. That's going to enable us to compete better with the American and the other teams. I'm sorry about that,
That's fine.
Del. So we have highly optimized this transmission system. When we did that, we had to design it top down. That's what an engineer does. That's how I teach my students. The way you design is not to evolve step by step. I tell them you'll get nowhere if you do that. The way you design properly is to design top down. You think of the overall functions, the overall system, then you plan the subsystems that will work together to produce the overall function. And only when you've laid out all the systems do you then design the components of those systems. And when you bring all the parts together, you have this fully functioning system. So what you see in a system like a bicycle transmission is an irreducible system where many parts are needed simultaneously for there to be a useful function.
So the bicycle doesn't work unless they're all together.
That's right. And if one link breaks, the cyclist doesn't go anywhere. Right. Everything's got to be functioning.
It's just like my truck.
Yes.
You and I just went through. One little piece goes wrong and it's dead.
So we live in this very complex world with complex ecosystems and complex substances like water and air, and everything is finely tuned. You'd only have to have a small change in one of the properties of a substance like water and air, and the whole system breaks down. That's one of the reasons I think there's overwhelming evidence for design, because the world is far more complex than a bicycle or a spacecraft. There has to be a designer who put everything in place and fine-tuned everything.
Well, Stuart, that brings us to these two paradigms, because what you're saying from an engineering perspective is the paradigm that says everything grew up from the bottom, so to speak. It evolved from the small pieces up, is actually the opposite of how you can design any system.
That's right, and also I do research in design in the natural world. I've done research on trees and birds and insects and the human body. And what I see in natural systems are the same kind of mechanisms that I see in engineering. Now in engineering, whether I'm designing gearboxes or bearings or structures, they're all irreducible designs. They cannot be evolved step by step. But I see each of those structures and mechanisms in the natural world. So I can't see any hope for evolution to produce anything that we see in this world by process of evolution.
So just as we see in the plants around us, that process of photosynthesis, all of the pieces and mechanism of photosynthesis have to be there.
Absolutely. A plant is an irreducible system because it needs to produce food to live, but it can't produce food unless it has the chlorophyll and the mechanism to produce by photosynthesis. So everything in that plant has to be together, and there's no evidence of plants evolving step by step. And I wouldn't expect any evidence because you can't evolve that kind of complex system.
So then if you step higher, even the plant itself has to have the sun and the earth and the nutrients and the water and the air for the cycle. It just becomes extremely more complex.